Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give it obviously a few moments to see as participants join in today. The number is ticking up very quickly. And we have folks joining from all across the province, indeed, even some folks joining us from across the country today, which is very exciting because this work really does touch folks all the way across the country. So I'm very pleased to see so many people here. Okay, it's starting to slow down a little bit now, so I'm gonna get us going because we have a very packed agenda and really want to make sure that we're giving Brenda as much time as possible to share about the criminal justice system. But hello, everybody, and welcome to Justice After Exploitation, a webinar presented by Family Services of Greater Vancouver. I'm Ariane. I'm the Director of Communications and Advocacy here at Family Services, and I'll be your MC for the next hour. I will very quickly just run through some housekeeping as a couple more people trickle in here. If you need tech support today, you can contact Lisa Tweeten via email or directly in the Q&A function in Zoom. So Lisa's email is ltweeten@fsgv.ca. That's LTWETEN @fsgv.ca. or the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. There is going to be an opportunity to ask questions after the presentation today, and you can use, again, the Q&A function to submit those at the bottom of your screen. But let's get going. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Terriea Harris for our land acknowledgement and a grounding exercise. Terriea is a registered therapeutic counselor, best-selling author, and priestess trained in Kundalini dance. For almost 15 years, she has shared her gifts of cultivating safe and brave spaces for folks to embody their worthiness to be true to themselves and to speak their authentic truth. She acknowledges her role as a statement gatherer with the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls as especially impactful and meaningful. Holding sacred space for the extraordinary stories of survival and the grief of family members who have lost Indigenous daughters, mothers, sisters, and aunties to systems of oppressions, and who contributed their truths to the final report, Reclaiming Power and Place. Her personal harrowing story as a survivor of child sex trafficking, including navigating the criminal justice system to stand for justice against her traffickers, is an inspiring testament to the resilience and capacity of the human spirit to transform pain into purpose. Terriea, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Hello, everyone. I feel so grateful to be here. I am to speak to an issue that is so near and dear to my heart and my personal story, and to bear witness to someone who I consider to be just an amazing ally and advocate in the fight for equality and standing against the exploitation of youth. Brenda. So with that, I would love to begin by inviting us to just do an exercise to presence and ground ourselves. And through that, we can also do our land acknowledgement wherever we are zooming in from in this country. So if it feels good to you, you can close your eyes. If that doesn't feel safe or okay, you can just soften them and find somewhere in your space to gently gaze off at. I'm going to close my eyes. And then inviting us to rest in our back body. So our back body being our upper back, our middle back, our lower back, and our hips. and our spine. So just playing with what does it mean to rest in our back body? A lot of us like to come forward or scrunch our shoulders, just creating this spaciousness to rest into our own body's support. And then beginning to notice what's happening with your breath. And whatever's happening for you is perfectly okay. The invitation is, depending on whether you feel tired in this moment or you're noticing your anxiety is a bit up, you can, if your anxiety is a bit up, you can take a breath in through the nose. If you're needing a bit more energy, the invitation is to breathe in through your mouth. The only requirement, so to speak, is to track the breath all the way down into your belly. So let's do that together. So taking an inhale and slowly exhaling, tracking the breath coming out on the exhale. Let's take another inhale together and slowly exhaling. Next, I'd love to invite us to bring our awareness to the soles of our feet. And if we were all still children and I asked you to imagine something, right away you'd be able to do it effortlessly. So the invitation is to bring that playful part back. And I invite you to imagine that you have roots growing from the soles of your feet. What color are they? Are they thick? Are they thin? Are they a bit dry? And as you continue to track the breath coming down all the way into your belly, sending your roots down into the earth. And so, wherever you are zooming in from, inviting you to acknowledge the nation upon which you are a guest, a visitor, on which you work, you live, and you play. Maybe naming that nation to yourself. And if you don't know, then the invitation is to find out. As I acknowledge, I am in Vancouver, BC, and I am so grateful to the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. This beautiful land of BC that I get to work, live, and play on. And I also want to acknowledge that I am a guest here. My ancestors descend from Dakota, so Native American, Aborigine from Australia and South American, as well as all other kinds of places all over the planet, according to genealogy. It's just landing into gratitude for the land that you are on. And then you might want to start to come back by opening up your eyes if they were closed and giving your body some sort of stretch. So I would just love to say that my own personal journey with the criminal justice system happened about 28 years ago now. And to this day, at 44 years old, I remember the impact that different systems had on my journey. I remember the impact that the police force, the juvenile task force, had on never giving up on me, despite my rebellion as a teenager. They never gave up. And they were a bit awkward at times, but to this day, I appreciate that they never gave up on me. I also remember the impact of the support workers who supported me as I did my statement, and the foster care and group home workers who helped me do little things like get dressed, what I was going to wear to court, and that just showed their care and support in between the trial and during the trial. I also remember the Crown that came up to me after and said, you know what, Terriea, if it wasn't for you and your testimony, he probably would have walked. So I just invite us all to tune into what is that impact that you desire to have on a youth who is being exploited, who is at risk of exploitation, or who is navigating the criminal justice system after exploitation. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I feel personally much more grounded and ready for this topic and what we're going to dive into today. And thank you for sharing your story. That's such a meaningful way for us to kick off this really difficult conversation that we're going to have. We do have a very special guest here today, and I'm so pleased to turn things over to the Honourable Grace Lore, Minister for Children and Family Development, to say a few words. So Minister, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if you can see me. I'm not able to turn my video back on. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much for that opportunity to be present and to breathe and to settle ourselves in here today. My name is Grace Lore. I'm the Minister for Children and Family Development here in BC, and I'm calling this afternoon from the territory of the Lekwungen peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation. This is the land that the legislature is on. It's also the territory that I'm privileged to raise my family on, and the territory I'm honored to represent here at the legislature. I want to thank everybody for spending some of your day, giving your lunch hour over to this important conversation. I can't say enough about what organizations like the Family Services of Greater Vancouver does. I'm such a believer in the expertise, heart, and commitment that is community work, that is the community organizations like yours, how you know what community needs and show up for the youth and their communities and families who most need us to get it right. I come to this work, this weird work of politics, in part through the anti-violence world, working with sexual assault centers. I spent some time as a victim service worker, advocating for wraparound services for survivors of sexualized violence. And as Minister for Children and Families, I have the opportunity to learn from and visit child and youth advocacy centers. And as I said, the incredible organizations who are our partners in this work. And the Family Services of Greater Vancouver is no exception to the depth and heart of work that is done with our partners where we do together. I know too many of you know this too well. The impact of child exploitation has impacts on those children and youth, their families, their outer circles and communities, and it can last generations. We know that the multitude of negative outcomes that we see so often can be directly tied to adverse childhood experiences, including exploitation. As Minister, a commitment to continue the work with community partners to review our systems and services and to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to support children and youth in a trauma-informed way, safely and respectfully and meaningfully and in partnership, and that we're continuing to identify how we need to be able to respond to childhood exploitation and take the steps in our ministry and across government. I wanted to share that one of the ways this work has been happening and work I was honored to work on as Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity includes the Intimate Images Protection Act. We need to be nimble, we need to be responsive, we need to understand the tools that individuals are using to exploit and make vulnerable and marginalized youth, and look for all the ways that we can respond with all the tools in our toolkit. Thank you so much for having this conversation, for coming together to here to learn. And I, again, want to thank the Family Services of Greater Vancouver and really recognize your keynote speaker, Brenda Lochhead, for the years of devoted service, for the expertise, and for doing this work to better understand the barriers that youth face navigating the justice system and how we can come together to address them. I look forward to continuing to work together with folks as I'm relatively new in this ministry, that it is just a privilege to continue to connect and learn and to do this work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terriea and Minister Lore, for your kind words and generosity of time. My name is Maria Howard, and I am the CEO of Greater Family Services, of Family Services of the Greater Vancouver. And I'm really pleased that you've all joined us today for this really excellent learning opportunity. I joined the agency about 3 years ago, and when I did, I was so impressed by our staff, our frontline staff, about their care, their compassion, their commitment, their very deep expertise in the way that they supported people, and their resilience to keep doing that. And as I've gotten to know them and learn more stories about the clients we've supported, it's just been humbling to know the supports that are out there, and finding ways to ensure that people feel a safe place to come to get their support. So today I'm really pleased that we can lift the curtain, so to speak, and share with you a little bit about the work that we do. For those of you on the call today who might not know about Family Services, we have been supporting people through communities across the Lower Mainland in BC since 1928, supporting children and youth and families in crisis, and doing this through targeted programs such as our family and trauma counseling, our 24/7 supports for unhoused youth, our financial literacy programs, our life skills for young people with support needs, and of course through our victim services. Family Services believes that everybody who comes in crisis comes with their own story too. And it's through us getting to know them, their story, understanding what is important for them, understanding that the barriers that they are trying to struggle with, and working and walking alongside of them and helping them reach the goals that are important to them. That is how we believe we can help them get to the place they want to be. Everybody deserves to find their own self-worth, and by understanding who that person is and their story and how they are responding to the crisis, to the trauma they've experienced, is how that we can help them get there. And so I'm so pleased that we are here today to hear from Brenda and really have this important conversation. So thank you again for joining us. And at this moment, I will turn it over to Cheryl Melder to give a few more words on counter-exploitation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheryl Melder, and I'm the Program Director for Family, Trauma, and Victim Support at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. I'd love to tell you just a little bit about our history with Victim Services. And we've been providing power and gender-based violence for support for nearly 40 years. And we've been working in co-located partnership models with municipal law enforcement agencies for over 25 years. In 2016, we started the first ever counter-exploitation unit in partnership with the Vancouver Police Department. And since then, we've set the national standard for working with victims of domestic human trafficking and exploitation, with a focus on navigating the criminal justice system. Youth are particularly at risk for this type of exploitation. And in fact, across Canada, 40% of survivors of domestic human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation are under the age of 18. At Family Services of Greater Vancouver, we embrace our responsibility for our children and youth, their health, their well-being, and their futures. We recognize that specialized, trauma-informed, and trust-based victim services are critical to supporting the recovery of all survivors, particularly as they navigate the criminal justice system, and we play a unique role in identifying and supporting youth victims of exploitation and human trafficking. With that, I am so honored to be able to introduce our presenter today, Brenda Lochhead. Brenda has more than 30 years of experience in the anti-violence sector. Her expertise in the area of human trafficking is widely recognized across BC and Canada, and she was instrumental in the development and implementation of a coordinated framework for supporting victims of human trafficking. Brenda recognizes the complexity of the trauma experienced by trafficking and sexually exploited youth, and she tailors her support with a dynamically multi-layered and always client-directed approach to be able to meet them where they're at. She is deeply engaged with stakeholders across the country about the unique needs of victims of sexual exploitation, and she is now turning her attention to educational outreach through trainings, workshops, webinars like this, and highlighting her collaborative approach to providing support services from a trauma-informed and client-centered lens. It has been a joy and privilege of mine to have worked with Brenda for many years, and I'm so pleased to now turn things over to her. Brenda, on to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm not sure if the video is working yet. Thank you so much, Cheryl, and thank you to everybody for taking some time out today. We're going to be kind of going down these steps and journey of navigation of the criminal justice process. So we have, I think, about a half hour, and so we should be able to solve all of those mysteries. Of course, we're not going to be able to do that. So what I am going to do is focus on some key steps that we as support people may find ourselves using to navigate through the process. So if we could jump in here to the next slide, that would be perfect. So I want to say up front is that whenever I'm working with youth who are victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation, it's really important that I work from a place of my trauma-informed practice. And so often language is so important, and we hear trauma-informed a lot. So I just want to just say what that means to me and how that guides me through my work with youth. So for me, a trauma-informed practice means that youth are going to be able to gain agency and autonomy. And through that, we see a successful support system being put in place. That is so true in navigating through the criminal justice system because their autonomy and choice becomes so important that they are able, through knowledge and awareness and facts and advocacy, which is part of my job, able to make those choices. So, so where do we start? So we start with victims' rights. And I think that this is, really important. And we often hear about victims' rights, but these are legislative rights. I'm not going to go through all of those, but I highly recommend that you look them up and read them through, especially as support people. We need to know that information. We need to know it from an advocacy standpoint, but we also have to know that we have to share that information with the youth because they can take that and add that to their choices and their decision making. Next slide, please. One of the rights of victims is be treated fairly and with respect by all workers in the criminal justice system. That may seem kind of a strange right to have legislated, and I'm not at any point trying to suggest that there's any intent not to respect youth or victims through the process. But the process itself can cause feelings of being disrespected, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to be able to advocate for that, and we have to hope that we are giving information, awareness, and knowledge to the youth to be able to push back on that too. Next slide, please. So, as I said, there's no possible way to go through all the steps that we would witness navigating through the system. So a couple that we're going to kind of tap into today and just talk about the barriers and bumps in the road that we may face. So here's what we're going to talk about. First, contact with police and providing a statement, arrest, investigation, and charges, the Crown interview, testifying, verdict, and at the end, sentencing and victim impact statement. So if I could just go to the next slide. So this is where we're talking about victims' rights. So I have often told support workers, print out a copy of the rights and keep them in your pocket. I gather that's old school to print something out on paper now and have it on hand, but please have it on your phones, because you never know when you might feel some pushback on those rights. Often over the years, the pushback is found right here at the first interview with police. Many police do not believe that support people should be in the room during the interview. It is a right for the victim to ask for that support person to be in there. So right away, we can see that that's a point that we have to be prepared to say, no, this is a right, and this is why this is here. Next slide, please. After that first contact with police and the interview is done, and of course, I am rushing through all of the things that could come up and barriers and boundaries just around that alone. But for the sake of time, we're going to kind of go through this a little quicker. After the interview is done, it's really important that we keep that connection with the youth. This is why I promote these embedded programs. It has worked so brilliantly in the CEU, and we have detectives in that unit and detectives that have come through that unit who really do grasp that understanding of keeping a connection with the victims through their long and intense investigative work. But it's a right of the victim to be updated, where they don't have to have the details, but they have the right to know, yes, the investigation's proceeding or not. What we found in this counter-exploitation unit, that often this can be, the detectives don't have time to reach out personally to the youth, but will ask me to just check in with them and let them know that they're saying hello and that the investigation's going on. Often I would advocate that if they could find some time during the day to come and meet with the youth, if they are requesting that, just to say hello and to build that connection. So once we get through the investigation and we move into an arrest and then charges, this is where things start to take a little bit of a different change. Next slide, please. So meeting the standards to charge. So a lot of people get arrested and charged kind of, they intertwine and we're not sure what exactly we're talking about. For youth, going in and doing the interview, they are at a place sometimes where they believe now this person who's caused all of this trauma to them and have done these terrible things are now going to be arrested and then they're going to go to jail. Obviously, that is not what's going to happen. However, we don't want to ever discourage the idea that they have choice through this. But this is where we see a little bit of a lean away from that navigational stretch that we have been on. It's not about believability. It's about if you can prove that this has happened. That's where charges come from, and that's the crown. They have to meet these standards. There has to be a likelihood of conviction. This can be really difficult to understand for most of us, let alone if you are a victim of human trafficking and exploitation and you are a youth. Next slide, please. Again, this takes a lot of time. Once we get to charges, there's still this idea that things are going to move really quickly. They do not. We're going to have to have a lot of time of just attending court for different appearances, and there's a lot of delays. Working towards getting to an actual trial date can take a long time. Again, it's important that the youth is always updated and knows that this is not unique to them. This is unique to this system that they are participating in. There are delays, things do not happen quickly, and there's constant movement and change. Once the trial date is set, then again we see another shift in the path that we are on. There's going to be a subpoena dealt to the youth. This can be, again, a kind of a troubling time because things now aren't so much about choice, that this is the system, and once that subpoena is served to them, this brings up other issues. For this collaborative approach that we do with the VPD, the detectives will let me know, look, the subpoena needs to be served. Can you let us know what's a good time, where's a good place for us to go and do this? Bring me along. Once the subpoena is handed off, then I sit with that youth and we go over that subpoena line by line by line. So there is a complete understanding of exactly what this step looks like. Next slide, please. So Crown interview. And I just want to say that when we are looking at this idea of trauma-informed practice, we can educate as we go, as we advocate. So Crown will want to meet with the youth beforehand, have that introduction, and then sometimes have a second interview. I have advocated a lot with Crown to say, can you come to the youth? What the feedback for me is that youth don't want to come to Vancouver. They don't want to go into this office. They don't want to talk to this strange person in a suit. I had one youth say to me, it's just like going to the principal's office. It's very intimidating. And so I have had Crown over the years literally meet youth where they're at. And I just think that says a lot about this idea of having that trauma-informed practice and advocacy, and that we're aware of that, that we can actually advocate for that kind of change. I wanted to say too that at the Crown interview, and it usually happens after at the second interview, but it is mentioned, of course, at the first, is disclosure. This can be a really scary moment for youth because it's really made evident that everything that they have told in their statement and everything that they have spoken to will now be disclosed to the defense and therefore disclosed to the trafficker. This can be very scary for many reasons. And it's not just about feeling that idea of being unsafe physically or that they're at risk physically, but emotionally. Because as we know, human trafficking is layered. And the idea of this coercion and this control that traffickers can have over these youth sometimes is about feelings and emotion. And the idea that now the trafficker knows that they have spoken about all of these things, it can be a very tricky time. But they have a right to know that this disclosure will happen. Next slide, please. So testifying, we certainly don't have enough time for me to go through everything that I would like to point out on testifying. I think that for those in the audience that who have already, supported victims through the system, know that it's really important to do lots of court prep, to do some, to go to the courtroom beforehand and have that tour. What I want to talk here is about the idea again of rights, and they have rights to testimonial aids. An example of that would be a screen. So they can ask for that. I think what's important here, again, is when we're talking about autonomy, it's not about so much that they ask and they will receive. It's about the fact that they can ask. And so testimonial aids like a screen should go smoothly. However, sometimes it does not. So if the Crown hears that that's a request of the youth, then the Crown will approach the defense. If the defense agrees, then the screen will be put up during the testimony. If the defense pushes back on that, then the Crown will have to make an application to the judge, and the judge often will agree to the testimonial aid. And this screen goes up and the youth cannot see the gallery, cannot see the lawyers of the defense or the trafficker, but they can see that, the youth. And so when that screen goes up, and if we had to go to that step of application, we're now taking up time. And this is where we really have to make sure that we are really pushing that respect area of rights, because others' agendas are now getting influenced by the youth accessing their rights of having a testimonial aid. What's interesting about this is that our advocacy doesn't end with the screen going up. Often I have found over many years that once they are in the and in court and testifying that that screen is up, they actually don't like it and they find it claustrophobic, or often they feel much more comfortable about the whole process and they will ask for that screen to be taken down. So you're now advocating to have it taken down. So that's really important. Just one quick note here. I'm trying to be careful on the time, but the Crown will discuss questions, because at the end of the day, that is the only job that the youth has, is to answer the questions. And so Crown will give them an idea of what those questions will look like and how they're asked and how defense will ask questions. And as much prep as we do, sometimes this doesn't always go exactly how we hope, but I did have a youth who was doing very well, and it came to the point where the defense was going to ask the questions, and every time a defense asked a question, the youth would ask a question back. And so this became quite frustrating for the defense, who then asked the judge, could you please address the witness and ask them to just answer my questions. And the judge, who was very lovely, said to the youth, could you just answer the questions that the defense is asking? And then the youth said, I will, but they're really stupid questions. And so there we are. And at the end of that trial, I must say that Crown did tell the youth that they didn't disagree with that. Next slide, please. So again, I think that the one thing that I want to talk about here about the testifying is, and this can be confusing, is that this isn't about believing the youth, it's about proving guilt. So proving guilt versus believing in the guilt. The job of the Crown is to prove that this is true, prove that this person did commit these crimes, and that can get very confusing for a youth when they know what the truth is. They know that this happened to them, and they're not really understanding why everybody else isn't just believing that to be true. Next slide, please. And I just want to talk about the verdict here. And I think this is a really, really important point. When we come forward and we are going to be support people for youth, we need to come with a clean slate. We can't bring our bias and our opinions and predictions and assumptions to the table and offer that for the youth to consider. We need to come with facts and information and allow them to decide what's best for them. I think this is an important step in the navigation of the system, the not guilty and the guilty. For many of us, the scary part here is if they're found not guilty, and this could be devastating, and it can be. But for a youth, the guilty could just be just as intimidating and overwhelming and hard to handle, because we have to remember that the crime itself and the uniqueness of this crime and the uniqueness of these victims, the trauma is layered. And the idea that they've come forward and now this person who has been in their lives is now going to have to own up to a guilty due to the fact that the youth came forward. So we need to be really careful about where we believe our supports are going to be needed and the reality of what actually can come forward. Next slide, please. So sentencing, once we get to the verdict and we get a guilty verdict, we'll move into sentencing. This is another of those areas where we have to really be aware that this doesn't mean that this is the safest spot for the youth because they've gone through all of this. We have to always be prepared to keep them in safe space going throughout this. This is the step where they do get to do their victim impact statement. The judge is going to take that and consider that in their weighing of what the sentence is going to be. Victim impact statements have four corners. It's not the moment where we get to just say everything that we want to say, we want to happen to this person. It's about talking about the impact of this on you. And that can be really, really difficult. You must have time to sit and go over the victim impact statement with your youth, because it can be a very difficult process. But because of their autonomy, they may choose not to do that at all. Next slide, please. So the conversation, and just skip again, thank you. So all of this that we talked about, that I'm trying not to rush through too quickly here, is the conversation. And so we started this by saying that the youth are going to come and do an interview with police. All of this information that we talked about today, that is going to be part of your conversation before that part of the decision or that part of the navigation begins. They have to come to a place where they are comfortable with that decision. We need to be able to keep our trauma-informed lens on at all times through all these barriers and really have a bigger picture of what some of those barriers can be. One of the most important aspects of this is the rights that I talked about at the beginning, and the idea of respect. Respect for the person becomes secondary when the agenda of the criminal justice system is considered the most important. That happens. Each player in this path that we're traveling, each member of the criminal justice system has an agenda. And not often it is about the victim after the first interview and first contact with police. This is not saying that there's an intent to not be kind or considerate, but it may be that their job becomes first, victim second, crime first, and that just leads to a real place of disrespect. And we have to be cautious of that as support people. Next slide, please. So specific barriers, I think that it's really important when you're talking about the crime of human trafficking, it is so layered and it is so unique. I often say in my trainings is what's not unique about this is the traffickers. They have a set way of how they do this. It's a business model. What is unique is each victim, and we have to make sure that the education of all of those players in the system, starting with the police, are aware. I have to say that the detectives in the counter exploitation unit over the years have really opened their minds to exactly what that looks like, and their knowledge and awareness around the crime itself has been really good to see. Not just that it's compact to that unit, but it carries on out when they move on to other units and that they carry that information. Next slide, please. So a couple of things here that I think that we really need to take just a few minutes to talk about. Crown counsel are not the victim's lawyer. And sometimes people are really shocked about that. This is not the victim's lawyer. Crown counsel are society's lawyers, and they're representing society. The victim does not have legal representation during this process. And it's really important that we remember that. The other aspect, which is really specific often to this crime itself of human trafficking and sexual exploitation of youth, is forced criminality. Part of that coercion and control that traffickers use is to have that youth be involved with a criminal activity. Once that they have done that, then they use that as a control mechanism so that they do not come forward to police. They do not step outside of that bubble that they are in, because they will be in trouble. What has been unfortunate is that sometimes we have found that the criminal justice system does just that. They look at this victim and they realize that they've committed a criminal act and look to actually charge the victim. Fortunately, as I have mentioned, the detectives that I've worked with over the years have really come to understand what forced criminality is, and have become some of the biggest advocates in making sure that everybody understands that we always put victim first, crime second. I think that we see that, I've seen that, that advocacy by detectives follows through to Crown, who are now looking at this and saying, aren't we supposed to be charging this person too? And it's about education and awareness. I did mention the subpoena, and I just want to quickly go back to it. I think that, and I am guilty of this, and I was caught with this a couple of weeks ago. We're always learning, and I am always learning. So I really wanted to bring this up. I do get into a repetitive nature about how the subpoena should be, delivered, and that the youth has to have choice and some control over when and where and how. A subpoena is a court document, and we have to make sure that we explain to our youth that the judge is ordering you to come to court at this specific day. If you don't, the judge has the power to put what's called a bench warrant on you and direct police to go and pick you up and bring you back to court. Now, the probability of that happening is low. And so that is what I usually say. But I had a bit of a wake-up call about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I found out this happened out of province, but a judge did just that, put a bench warrant on a 16-year-old where the police went to the youth's home and forcibly brought them back to court to testify. So that is daunting to me that we are still at that place, but that is information in this conversation that we absolutely have to make sure that we address to our youth. Next slide, please. So obviously we are not going to talk statistics to our youth, but we need to know this. We need to know what the probabilities and what's the facts about when you go through this system. Time to complete an adult criminal case with one violent charge is 176 days. The median time to complete a human trafficking case with at least one human trafficking charge, 373 days. This is a lot of time. And as support people, we have to know that, because the continuum of care can be interrupted here. Just simply because you're moving out of the position or you're moving on, or you're no longer going to be able to work with this specific youth for whatever reason. So we have to know that this is the long game here. And it's important that we let the youth know that we may not be through this whole process, but also for the youth to know that this is not specific to them. They don't have to own this, but this is the system that they have chosen up to this point to participate in. Next slide, please. So again, the statistics, it's important. We're not going to say 11% and 83%, but what we're going to say is that the likelihood that this charge will get to guilty decision is low. It's low. And we have to be honest about that. And the fact that the trafficking case could end or be withdrawn or dismissed or discharged is high. And so that doesn't mean that we have to bring any kind of like, so why bother? That's not our job to do. Our job to do is to give youth this information and let them ask questions and let them think about what that means for them. Next slide, please. So the hidden buns, the courtroom is not a place of privacy. The courtroom is open to the public. It's super important that we address this in our conversation with youth. Through a few of the cases that I've done, one of the most troublesome moments for many of the youth is testifying and watching, and I know those who have done this, who have already accompanied victims to court, that it's open, and you see a lineup of youth coming in who are coming from grade 11 or college law classes, coming to witness a trial in session. We don't have any right to ask them to leave. And for your youth that you are there to help advocate for, there's not much you can do in that moment. For the youth, let's just think about that. They're up there and now they're talking about some of the most horrific events that have happened to them, and they're looking at their peers. Their peers are together, they're laughing, they're together, and they're out there. And it's a really hard moment for many youth when that happens. A bit of a silver lining here is that we are seeing some judges recognizing the sensitivity of this testimony. And I just had this a few weeks ago where the judge spoke to the sheriff. The sheriff went and spoke to the classroom, did not say that they had to leave, but offered a few other options of what trials were going on, with the caveat that this was kind of a sensitive trial. And if they would like to see a different type of trial, that they're welcome to do that. And they did leave in that moment. This is going to be my biggest rant. So like now we're at the end, and I think that's what's really important when we talk about agendas. So for the police, their job is done. For the Crown, their job is done. For the judge, their job is done. So now we're at this ending, and where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us kind of in a funny place for youth. Human trafficking files are becoming quite popular with the media because there's so few of them that go on. We are getting that kind of attention. So for protection of the identity of the youth, there are often and always really publication bans. Publication bans are limited in their ability to protect the youth. They are talking about keeping their name out of the public domain, but that doesn't mean that other information about these trials and these cases are kept out of the public domain. So what I have found over the last few years is that when a judge reads out the reasonings for their decisions, which is often intimate and extensive detail about the crime itself and what has happened to the youth, also quoting the impact statement, that will be written up in these stories. And so although none of us might be able to identify who that is, the youth knows that that's who they are. And so now I try to have conversations with reporters if that opportunity arises, where I can say, you know what, I want you to just think about this. This youth has come forward and has told people over and over and over again their story, and they have processed all of this, and they have stuck with this system that we have. And now they've gotten to the end, and you're going to take all of that and without consent tell their story. And that's just not really ethically responsible. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I really think this, again, is this place where we can put our advocacy hat on and just try to get that knowledge and awareness out into the public domain. Next slide, please. So the conversation, all of my conversations about how we're going to just manage this criminal justice system and navigate through start with defining justice. And I think that this is super important for us to, again, acknowledge that my definition of what justice is or what it should look like has no place in this conversation. This is where we have that conversation about the youth after we've given them all this information. What is it that you're looking for? Does all of this fit? Do you see yourself having justice through this process? Or is this process even related to the justice that you have in your mind? I think that one of the most moving moments for me and what really, really solidified this point was doing a case a few years ago. It was a very long trial due to a lot of delays, but it lasted almost 9 weeks. And the youth actually testified for 9 days. And it was really a horrendous event for everybody involved because of how long it took and how grueling it was on the youth, but they stayed with it. And we did get a guilty verdict in that case. And then we got to sentencing. And we're sitting there and we were listening to the reasons from the judge of why he was coming to the conclusions of what sentence that he was going to put on this defendant. And at one point, the justice said, the judge said, I believe the witness. I believe this victim. I believe her. And the youth turned to me with the biggest smile on her face. And after the sentencing was done and we all stepped out into the hallway, that youth did not want to talk about how many years that they were given. They did not want to talk about what kind of time or anything. All they wanted to talk about was, wasn't that great? Didn't you hear the judge said that they believed me? And in that moment, just for that second, that was that little bit of justice. So all of this grueling trial, all of this grueling time of trying to navigate all those bumps and barriers, that youth, for that moment, just felt believed, was told that they were believed, and that was their moment of justice. So I apologize for the quickness of all of this. It was a lot of information. If there's questions, I hope that we have some time. But thank you again for sharing your time with us today at lunch.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I know that we're flying through everything here today. We are opening things up to Q&A, so I'll be keeping my eyes on Q&A function just down at the bottom, so feel free to pop things into there. I know personally, just reflecting on everything that you've shared today, I have my own questions and so many things that I think you could dive much deeper on. I'm curious if you have advice for the folks in this space who maybe aren't the support workers. We've talked a lot about what it means to truly empower youth through this entire process of disclosing everything from the very beginning. How do you recommend other people who maybe aren't entering at that first touch point to make sure that they're keeping in mind all of what a youth is going through and how they can sort of meet youth where they're at as they're going through this and build that relationship no matter what point you're joining this process?
I think that, this information, yes, I'm kind of focused on the support worker role, but this is just a support person, and that person can be anybody in the youth's life. And so knowledge is power for everybody. And a lot of this information you can access. You can call a victim service worker just generally, and they'll share whatever information they have about what those steps look like. And to just arm yourself with as much information as you possibly can. And if you just read through the victim's rights, that gives you a lot of guidance of exactly where you feel that things should look. So yeah, control of the system is not in your hands, but participation in the system from a place of knowledge and support is. And so if you know what's going to happen, that is your power. If you can expect that these processes, these delays, and you understand are not your fault, and the person who's supporting you understands this is the norm, it doesn't make it go away that it's not impacting you or frustrating you, but it lets you know that that's just the system. And so those supports in itself, but let's be honest, this is a difficult system. You know, just the other day I'd said, Crown lawyers are not the victim's lawyer. This is a shock to people. Like, they just assume that. And so those types of things can be really frustrating, and it can be intimidating. And so you can just imagine if you were a victim and now you have to navigate through this, let alone a support person who's trying to do that. But if we can all just kind of gather that information together, then you will be able to provide the good supports.
I have a question here from an attendee. What is your process of support for post-trial, and what can come up for youth once the big emotions of the trial start to settle?
Like, that is an amazingly great question, because I think that just focuses back to this idea that we're navigating the criminal justice process. That is only like this little bit of information on the journey that the youth is on. There's everything that came before this, and there's everything that comes after for those players in the system, the police and the Crown and the judge. And there's an end date here. It's the trial, it's over. That's not going to happen for the youth. There are so many emotions and feelings that can come up. We still have to do safety planning here. We have to talk about what it is. Sometimes that's legitimately about the person who's been the trafficker and what that safety plan and this whole process looks like. But when you're talking about an emotional safety plan, this has been a buildup. They've been waiting for this to happen, and now we have that kind of letdown. But I think that's part of your prep too. They have other things going on in their lives. And so if we're doing that prep to the place where, yep, this is the end, this was great, what's next? And we just move it along with an acknowledgement that this can be daunting and it can have lasting effect. We're always aware of that. And so we kind of let ourselves be guided again by the youth, and not, define the trauma, if there is any, after this process.
Yeah. Another question around how youth are empowered throughout the process. What happens if a youth decides to change their mind partway through? You spoke a little bit about how to be nimble with like the screens in court as an example. What happens if a youth decides to disengage throughout this process or change their definition of justice? What happens then?
And I think that's where we see, I talked about the subpoena and the fact that they're under a court order, and we have to be really honest and aware that because that subpoena has come to that point, a judge may definitely put a warrant out. But otherwise, what we are finding that the youth, they choose to start or stop. Okay, I'm totally support that no matter what. I often have said, well, we're going to walk into the courtroom, and if you change your mind, we'll walk out. And then we'll go along with that. And so they can use their voice, and they can change their minds, and that's part of it. And I think that, even from that first step of having the interview with police, they can get into that interview and say, actually, I just don't want to do this. And that's great. Okay, that's their autonomy. They've gotten to the situation and they changed their mind. Support that 1000%. They can also come back again if they change their mind. And so we go through that. That doesn't mean that there won't be some barriers and bumps, but that definitely is their right to change their mind through this process. And then we have to deal with what that looks like.
Believe it or not, we are pretty much at time already. I do want to share with folks that we will send the slides around after the fact. And we also want to share that Brenda is now available, as mentioned earlier, for trainings and workshops. So if this was faster paced than you were hoping for and you really would like to take a deeper dive, please do get in touch with us. My email is on the screen, or will be shortly on the screen. So please do that. Very quickly, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for joining us today, for your thoughtful questions and for your engagement on this really important conversation. And on behalf of all of us at Family Services, I'd like to extend our thanks again to Minister Lore for being here today, to the Department of Justice Canada for making this webinar possible. Terriea, thank you so much for sharing your story, and Brenda for your expertise today. And to each and every one of you watching, whether you work with youth directly or indirectly, thank you for showing up. Thank you for supporting young folks. We'll be sending out a survey to attendees and would really appreciate your feedback, as we're definitely looking to do more webinars like this in the future. And we are always learning, and your input will help us improve these events for the future. And finally, if you were inspired today, I hope you'll consider making a donation to support our victim services work. There's a QR code on the screen, and we'll share that link in our survey follow-up as well. But that's it for today. Thank you everybody for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye folks.